Hello, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. Hope you're keeping safe and well. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic which many of you may be not all that aware of. We're going to be discussing among other things, the lesser horseshoe bat in Ireland and the challenges the species faces, and some insights into how they work or they live. And we're delighted to be joined by Kate McInerney, Ireland Mammal Programme Manager with Vincent Wildlife Trust. Good morning, Kate. You're very welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
And we're also joined by our Teagasc Countryside Management Specialist, Dr. Catherine Keena. Good morning, Catherine.
Hello, all. How are you?
So, Kate, perhaps before we start into your presentation, you could give us a little insight into the work that you are doing in the Vincent Wildlife Trust.
Yes, well, I think people will primarily know me as working on bats because that's the group of animals that I started working back in the 1990s with Vincent Wildlife Trust. But I suppose in the early 2000s, we began to become concerned about the conservation status of other species of mammals. And here in Ireland, that's the pine marten and the Irish stoat. And we currently have a citizen science survey underway on the Irish stoat. It's coming near the end, but we would encourage people, if they could, to go onto the National Biodiversity Data Centre if they have any records recently of having seen the elusive and interesting Irish stoat, that they could enter their records to that. So with the pine marten, it's essentially getting information out to people about this naturally recovering carnivore that, we can live with it.
Mm-hmm. And just, you mentioned the National Biodiversity Centre. For those people who aren't familiar with that, maybe you could just share what's the purpose of that centre?
Yeah, it is the depository for recording all Irish wildlife throughout the island. And it's a very, very important resource. There are training tutorials there. It's an absolutely fantastic resource for us to have. And it has been instrumental in spearheading the work on pollinators. So I think we wouldn't know the situation and we wouldn't have all the fantastic work being done on pollinators, except for the National Biodiversity Data Centre. There's a tremendously talented team there. They've been hugely supportive to us for the Irish Stoat survey. But when you go on the NDBDC website, the opening page there will lead you to a lot of their surveys. And it's simply a case of clicking on the survey that you wish to learn more about. And it's very easy then to enter in your data. And without data, we don't have evidence of what's going on. And then the data there allows us then and other people to carry out analysis and to come up then with awareness of what species need help and to encourage people to do research on how you might actually carry that out.
So it's available to the private citizen to
Everybody,
upload or
exactly.
to report on sightings and...
Very much so, very much so. It's without ordinary, so-called ordinary people, we're all ordinary at the end of the day, but without that system there, we just would not know so much about what's happening in the environment. And everyone is able to learn. You may not be able to tell one butterfly from another butterfly or one bat from one bat, but there are instruction videos there, and it really enhances an appreciation of our natural environment. So, and it does take it away from the exclusiveness of the specialists. And so many of the citizen scientists, they may consider themselves amateurs, but by God, they know what they're about. And they are, they have a very professional approach to validating records as well. So we're so lucky to have it. Not everything. There's a corresponding one in Northern Ireland, CEDAR, Centre for Environmental Data and Recording. And obviously there are others elsewhere. But I really think the National Biodiversity Data Centre stands out as a really, really good resource.
So can I go into that website to see what the populations are in my area then, or the prevalence of particular species?
You can go, there's drop down menus and you can go there and distribution maps will appear. And obviously, if you enter a record today for an Irish stoat, it's not going to pop up on the map tomorrow. There's obviously going to be a time lag between when it can be validated and thoroughly checked. And there is a very robust system for that. We've discovered that during our stoat survey, that so many people didn't know what a stoat looked like. even though we had a manual there that people could download to distinguish it from other small mammals. There is a very robust system there for checking records, and it covers everything from mice, rats, right up to what we would consider to be the rarer species, birds, invertebrates. Really, really important, because it's difficult for people to record those sometimes or know what they're looking at, and obviously for plants as well. So absolutely anything that comes in within the natural environment, you can record there.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great introduction to your presentation. So we'll ask you to share your slides with us, Kate, and remind everybody that today's session has been recorded and will be available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, as well as all the podcast platforms. And Kate's presentation will also be available on the Teagasc website afterwards. And do please send us your questions through the Q&A tab at the bottom. And looking forward to the discussion afterwards with Catherine and Kate. So we'll hand over to you. That's looking good. Yeah, that looks perfect, Kate. And we'll chat to you after your presentation. So you seem to have gone on mute there, Kate. So you might want to unmute yourself. Yeah.
All right. Can you hear me again?
Yeah. Yes, we can. Yeah.
While she's just getting set up there, Mark, we've already had a request in to do to look at hedgehogs. So there's an idea for us.
Fantastic,
and I suppose that I always welcome suggestions in the chat for webinars, for future webinars on the biodiversity side. From my point of view, always good to get suggestions on speakers or topics.
Yes, that's you hit a really important point there, Catherine, that we rely on our audience and viewers to submit suggestions. So if you have ideas on future talks that you'd like to hear about or ideas, please do get in touch with us through the Q&A tab or through the connected@teagasc.ie.
Thank you to Teagasc, to Catherine, and particularly to Yvonne for asking me and helping me to assist with this webinar. In 2015, I inveigled my way on to the Teagasc Biodiversity Conference in Laois, Port Laois, to talk about lesser horseshoe bats. And that title of my talk then was "The West of Ireland Farmers Hold the Key to the Conservation of the Lesser Horseshoe Bat." And I probably could have reused that title, because 9 years on, it is the farmers in the west of Ireland that hold the key to the conservation of this species. The outline of my talk is, I'm going to say just a few words about what the Vincent Wildlife Trust is. I'm going to obviously introduce you to the species that we're focusing on this morning. I'm going to talk about the practical work that we have conducted at Roosts. I'm going to discuss some desktop modeling that we've been doing to try and bring our work out into the wider landscape. I'll obviously be speaking about our Mulcair project and finish off with some opportunities for future conservation work. So Vincent Wildlife Trust is a UK mammal charity with 2 full-time staff working here in Ireland. I'm based in County Galway, and my Species Conservation Officer, Vicky Knight, is based in Cork. And whatever way you describe it, vision, mission, we really aim to conserve threatened mammal species by leading the way with scientifically sound conservation work. And primarily our work is on the lesser horseshoe bat, but lately we have been trying to help the conservation of pine marten and Irish stoat. And we are very, very grateful for core funding from the Irish Environmental Network and from the Heritage Council, but also to National Parks and Wildlife Service and other funders who fund specific work that we do. So to introduce you to the lesser horseshoe bat, I think this is an amazingly attractive animal, but I know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It is one of our smallest species, tipping the scales at about 6 grams, which is equivalent to a €2 coin. So they are very small animals. It's the only member of the horseshoe bat family in Ireland. Now we have 9 bat species in Ireland. The other 8 belong to the Vesper family. So the lesser horseshoe is the only member of the horseshoe bat family. And the reason it has this incredibly curious face is that there are a number of cartilage flaps or folds of skin around the face, which is linked to its echolocation. So it's wearing its echolocation or audio system on its face. And one part of that is in the shape of a horseshoe, and that's how they get their name. It was first recognised as being present in Ireland as far back as 1858, but it was obviously here for thousands of years beforehand when Ireland was a woodland country, covered in woodland. It always hangs upside down from surfaces. So the reason being is that it is not able to land and crawl and disappear into masonry or under slates the way the other bat species do. So if you see an animal hanging freely, and we'll see slides of this later on, swiveling around on its little legs in the open in a structure, it's most likely to be a lesser horseshoe. Now, because it's not able to land and crawl, it doesn't have quadrupedal movement, it needs to fly directly into a structure like a swallow. So that immediately is going to limit the types of structures that it can access. So that's the first conservation feature that sets it apart from the other bats. And another feature is that it roosts generally in unoccupied buildings in summer, and it goes underground in winter. It chooses unoccupied buildings because these are going to be missing slates and windows, and in some cases even walls, so that it can easily access those unoccupied buildings. And it's the only species for which we know anything about in winter, and that's simply because we can see it when we go underground. It can be in caves, natural sites, mines, cellars, souterrains. And because it is visible, it has thankfully been the subject of a lot of research and survey work. So unlike other species endangered, we have basic information on which we can then build conservation projects. This is an example of one of the reserves. The Vincent Wildlife Trust owns or manages 12 of these buildings along the west coast. And this is the type of opening that we provide for the animal to fly, to emerge at dusk. And there is audio to it, but I'm not sure that that's working too well. But it gives you an idea of the light sampling behavior the bats need to do before they emerge and fly off to forage in the summer. So moving out into the wider landscape, this species needs linear features along which to fly. So if you see bats flying of an evening out in the open, if you're out on the farm, if you're walking a country road, even if you're in your garden and you see bats flying around, they will not be lesser horseshoe. They do not fly well in the open. Although their echolocation system is extremely well developed for flying within clutter, and their wing morphology, being broad-winged, they have very, very good control within tight spaces. Their echolocation call doesn't travel far, and so they're not able to detect any predator that may be flying at the same time. So they tuck themselves in alongside linear features, and these are hedgerows, tree lines, stone walls when we're in the burn. So the absence of those obviously is going to mean that they're not able to move safely through the landscape. They avoid illuminated areas. They're the most photophobic of the bats. And so having a line of artificial lights on lampposts will be equivalent, an equivalent barrier to them as a continuous wall. Although at least with a wall, they could fly over it, but they will not fly through illuminated areas. They avoid intensively farmed land because that's going to have maybe fewer linear features for them to fly along, and there'll be less insect availability. They avoid open spaces at high light levels. So they have very significant features that needs to be provided for them so that they can move safely within the landscape. Because of this, they are the only Irish bat species included under Annex 2 of the Habitats Directive. Therefore, special areas of conservation have been designated for it, 41 in all. Now, in some cases, they are the only qualifying interest, but in others, they're one of the qualifying interests. And we will be revising this 5,000 to 7,000 figure at the end of the year when the population estimates for this summer have been worked out. But in the region of half of the population could be within SACs. We're dealing with a very small population. There's in the region of maybe 14,600 They're just in 6 Western counties, which is why I used the description, the West of Ireland farmers hold the key. You'll see in a moment their distribution, and it is unevenly distributed. This shows the distribution of the species. Each of these yellow circles represents a roost. It could be a summer roost, as in a building where they move in spring to give birth to their one pup, their one young, or it could be an underground site in which they hibernate. So you'll see that there are two main clusters. We've one equivalent to South Galway and Clare, and then we have one in Kerry and Cork. We have the next biggest cluster is South Mayo, and then we have sporadic kind of records in North Galway and Limerick. But you'll see there is a gap there from Limerick to North Kerry. Now we had known that there was this gap in their distribution, but then there were 2 PhDs carried out looking at the genetics of these colonies. The first was carried out by Dr. Serena Dool in UCD, and the second was carried out by Dr. Andrew Harrington at WIT, as it was then. They found that there is now a genetic differentiation between the colonies of bats that you find in the different parts of their distribution. Now, these are called now subpopulations. So you can take a dropping from a bat in Mayo, and you can take a dropping from a bat in Kerry, and you will be able to see that they are slightly genetically different. So the 2 authors have led to this result in that we now have 4 subpopulations. We have a northern one, which is primarily the bats in South Mayo. The bats in North Galway are slightly different again to them. Then we move into South Galway and Clare, which is the central subpopulation. The dotted line signifies Andrew's research, which proved that Limerick is now a subpopulation. And then we have the subpopulation down in the south. Now, although there are numerically more lesser horseshoe bats down in Kerry and Cork, genetically they are more diverse in the central subpopulation. And this discovery really has galvanized our conservation efforts, because while we won't be able to reverse this, we certainly don't want it to proceed anymore. We want to ensure that lesser horseshoe bats within those different subpopulations are able to mingle and to keep the genetic diversity as good as possible. The first practical works that we started to do was to acquire some of these old buildings that were at risk of being lost. We carried out extensive survey work to find them. So this is the type, this is a typical lesser horseshoe roost. It is a stone building in a rural area with a slate roof, providing solar gain from the natural slate. And there were lots of windows and doors missing. This is another building that we took on in County Kerry, and you can see the vegetation is beginning to engulf the building, but the bats were able to enter through 1 or 2 openings. And then this is the final one of our other reserves, which is in County Mayo. We have a long-term lease in this, and again, this building was on its way out. So at the time, in the mid-90s and early 2000s, when we had access to major funding, we were able to retain these buildings, to carry out extensive repair work to ensure that they'd be on the landscape for a very long time, and provide purpose lesser horseshoe openings for them to exit. So in this photograph, you can see there's a gable exit, but in fact, around the back of the building where you see the trees, we provided another exit because the bats prefer to fly directly into shelter. But we always like to provide 2 exits in case something happens at one. This is that little building down in Kerry, and we are keeping control of the ivy on it. And this was the building that was almost completely engulfed. And we have 2 openings there. Initially, we provided one that you can see just to the left of the downpipe. But then as the numbers increased gradually over time, we had to provide a second exit for them. So between all of the 12 sites that Vincent Wildlife Trust owns or leases long-term, we have in the region of 4,000 lesser horseshoe bats that we care for. This is one of our sites in Kerry. And unfortunately, in a way, it came with 84 acres of mainly conifer woodland, which we didn't want to buy, but if we wanted the building, we had to buy the woodland. But it's been a good challenge to us because we've been able to enter into the native woodland scheme. we entered into this for 6.6 hectares, removed the conifer and planted up about 2,000 deciduous trees in tubes to try and prevent them being eaten by deer. And then we were very lucky and grateful to be able to enter a second area, and this is a much bigger area, and so we used a deer fence to protect the trees. And although I'll be long gone before these trees are on the landscape, it is a major, major contribution to the biodiversity, not just of lesser horseshoes, but hopefully to other wildlife there as well. I'm very grateful to Pádraig Ó Tuama for helping us with that. Now, other people have been doing conservation work as well. This is something that I worked with in the early days with National Parks and Wildlife Service when they were developing their farm plan scheme, which I should say is now open for people to enter for the latest round of that funded scheme with NPWS. And we were looking, I was working closely with Barry O'Donoghue at the time to see could lesser horseshoes be accommodated within that scheme. And we learned a lot of valuable lessons from working with this landowner. This was the original roost site. So we have a lovely old stone building, galvanized roof, and then we have a little lean-to. And inside of that lean-to, this is where the bats were hanging. So although they had no access into the lean-to from the lean-to, they were able to access it from the galvanized roof building. And you can see there's a window in the adjoining wall, and that's what they were using. There were a small number, I think maybe the Conservation Ranger Emma was counting maybe 12 or 15 lesser horseshoes hanging on under the galvanized on the one timber beam. So what we did was, I have a wonderful builder I worked with in Clare, we raised the roof. An air roof is far better for the bats because heat will build up. And we also provided a ceiling. So it's a 2-story building now, in a sense, in that there's a hatch that the bats can fly up and down, and providing bats with lesser horseshoe bats with different temperature regimes is important within one building if you can. And the numbers have increased. There were over 90 one summer. I think there was 89 there this summer. So this cost, the work that we've done in the past cost many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands in some cases. But this cost, I think, in the region of a couple of thousand. So it's very doable and has really worked. A much cheaper version of enhancing roost space within a building is what we call putting in a hot box. So this is sheets of timber. You sheet off a section of an open roof, you leave a hatch, you make sure that there's a safe opening on the ground floor, and you'll see some of the predator proofing we've done at ours later on. So just make sure that no predator can sit and take the bats as they fly in and out. And again, this has proven to be very useful. And in fact, we were able to provide through the Hen Harrier project a couple of years ago funding to 2 individuals in the Slieve Aughty areas who undertook to do this work in 2 little outbuildings of their own, and the bats are using them, maybe not as maternity roosts, but as night roosts, and having a lot of different places for the bats to hang and rest up during a season is critical. At one of our sites in Kerry, we discovered that there was a room that received no heat. It was north facing, very well sheltered by vegetation, and it seemed to be cool enough that the bats might use in winter. And so we just provided additional timber under the ceiling, and we can have well over 100, sometimes 130 lesser horseshoe bats hibernating in this in winter. But this is an unusual situation in that further north from Limerick up into Mayo, because of there's a couple of degrees difference in temperature, believe it or not, between the north of their range and the south of their range. In the northern part of the range, they do seek underground sites that are more stable, where they can lower their body temperature and save energy over the winter months when we have winter temperatures. Whereas down south, the temperature can be that little bit warmer. And so at most of our sites in Kerry, the bats will use the upper part of the building, the roof spaces in summer to where they're young, and they simply fly down the stairwell, fly into a cool area and stay there for the winter. Now there is now fully blown NPWS farm plan scheme, and I would urge you to go on to the NPWS's website and watch this video of Alan Daly and his daughter Alana, because they have entered into a farm plan scheme. The major qualifying interest, in a sense, was the lesser horseshoe bat, but now they're carrying out a lot of other additional features on the landscape, and it's what they have done is absolutely amazing, and it is certainly going to be a very important roost site in the future. Already there's over 60 or 70 bats using the work at the building that they carried out. Moving on to the modelling work that we've been doing, because there's a limit to the amount of work we can do at the roosts, and we know what needs to be done, we know what works, but we need to assist the species on a wider landscape. But we can't do everything we need to do everywhere. So we need to be very strategic and target our actions. And so we've undertaken a number of modelling studies on behalf of a number of local authorities. The first to approach us to do this was Galway City, who wanted to find if there is a wildlife corridor through the city. And we said, well, we don't deal generally with general widespread wildlife, but if we can do this study just focusing on the lesser horseshoe bat, anything that benefits that species will obviously benefit other species of invertebrates and other mammals. So we used a system, or my colleague, Dr. Patrick Wright, uses a software system package called Circuitscape. And it is based on electrical circuit theory, where the basis is that electricity will find the path of least resistance to pass from one point to another. And really what we're doing with Circuitscape, using habitat information on river systems, information on woodland cover, and information on where artificial lights are sited in the landscape. All of that data, all those data sets are used by Patrick in Circuitscape to produce an image like this. And essentially the blue area is Galway City, and there is low connectivity or low possibility of bats moving through it, which is not surprising. But the red areas indicate areas of high connectivity. Now, it's predicting that these areas are potentially good for bats to move through. And then the yellow areas are maybe not as suitable, but have potential. So what Patrick did was he took one area just on the edge of where it looked as though the lessers were running into trouble. So they could travel down along the coast, and then they came to a section where there was little connectivity. He then removed, in theory, 116 lights in the city centre. So if you can see the little network of chains, is like a chain in the slide. Each of those little dots is an artificial light. It's a lamp, a light on a post. And he removed 116 of those, and that created a potential pathway. So we've repeated this study with Kerry County Council, with Limerick County Council, we're just completing that study now, and with Clare County Council, where we've looked at specific areas. And it's to inform the local authorities, the planners, people putting roads in place, choosing where to put lights at road intersections, that it may be possible with a little bit of consideration to enable bats and other wildlife to find their way in the landscape, but still have people safe, which is always the priority. In the Galway City study, we predict that certain areas of the city are still permeable, especially where there's woodland, Merlin Park Woods. Any of you travelling from Galway, the old road down to Limerick, you'll pass Merlin Park Hospital. That woodland is key to connecting, maintaining a connection between bats further north in the county and those into South Galway and then back down into Clare. And rivers, we know, have tremendous potential, as does the River Corrib, but not where it is illuminated. So this brings us to the project that we carried out with the funding from the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. And essentially, we wanted to build roosts for the lesser horseshoe bat in East Limerick. And it ran from August 2021 to March 2023, but we are still monitoring and we're still very much in contact with the farmers and with the buildings that we constructed with their help. And this was funded under the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development. So it was one of the short-term EIPs. And we wanted to focus on Limerick because of that gap that I mentioned earlier. This has been the first funded agri-environmental scheme for lesser horseshoe bats. There was funding made available for bats under previous REP schemes, but as you can see from this photograph, lesser horseshoe bats cannot access any kind of bat box, even ones that work really well, such as the old Svegler bat boxes. So the Mulcair Lesser Horseshoe Bat project was the first, has been the first, totally devoted just to the lesser horseshoe bat. Now, we undertook this when COVID was still very much on the horizon. And initially, the Mulcair project began with my ringing Carol Quish, who was the project manager or accountant associated with the existing 5-year Mulcair River Catchment project. And I rang Carol and I said, we see that there's been a funding competitive call announced. We don't have the capacity to deliver this within the time frame to set up all of the administrative necessary, like the GDPR and all the finance end of things. We know what we need to do. Would it be possible for the existing 5-year EIP to allow us to piggyback for a year and a bit? And she said, I'll arrange a meeting of some of the members of the existing operational group. And she contacted Farmer. We went down, myself and my former colleague Ruth, and we pitched our idea to John Dillon and David Thompson, who are 2 members of the operational group. And we managed to convince them to run with the idea. And we submitted our proposal and we were successful. And the initial aim was that we would build 10 new summer roosts for the species in that part of Limerick. The first thing we did when we were granted permission to go ahead was we went down to Glengariff, to the nature reserve there, where the National Parks and Wildlife Service had, following some designs and information we provided from a Spanish project, they had actually built a small new lesser horseshoe bat roost. So this was very valuable to us in that we took photographs of that and we provided those to an architect so that plans could be drawn up for our bat houses. We engaged a quantity surveyor so that tenders could be sought. We met potential participants to assess the most suitable locations, and we were provided with names and numbers of potential participants from the existing 5-year EIP, and I met them and we chatted and sussed out who would be willing to go ahead with the project with us. Once we had selected the sites with each of the farmers, we met NPWS at those to make sure that they were happy. We then provided quite a detailed information pack to each of the farmers with drawings, satellite imagery, QS information, so that they'd have everything they needed if they wished to build it themselves, which 2 of them chose to do, but the other 4 engaged a builder. But they had all the information they needed. We provided certain materials that we were very keen that needed to be used and aren't always easy to access. So we sourced the natural slate, which I mentioned earlier is the best roofing material to use for lesser horseshoe roost. It heats up slowly in the summer, it retains the heat and releases it slowly. The roof felt is critical. Many of the roof timber, the felt that's available for use in roofs is either too smooth for bats to hang from, or else it unravels over time and is a threat to the animals because they can get actually trapped by it. We fitted a special predator tray, which you'll see in a moment, from a design that we took from a Polish life project. We had the trays made locally by an engineering company in Limerick to a very, very high standard. We also provided external bat boxes for the other species, the Vesper bats, and we experimented with putting in bee bricks for the first time as well, because we wanted to make the bat houses as biodiversity friendly as possible. And all of this was done in conjunction with Limerick City and County Council as the planning authority, because although our bat houses were small, 3 meters high, 2.7 meters by 2.7, because we weren't building them on the farm yard itself, they were not exempt from planning. But because they were ticking so many of the biodiversity boxes within the biodiversity action plan for Limerick, we were able to go ahead and build them. The site selection was critical. We wanted to site them where there was already existing hedgerow and tree line. Now, there was provision in our project for the farmer to carry out additional planting, but in fact this wasn't necessary. We also wanted the bat houses to be within 1 kilometre of the water body, because that's an existing wildlife corridor. The site had to be level and dry so that builder could get over and back. We wanted minimum loss of productive land, which was important from the farmer's perspective. We stayed outside designated areas to make our lives a bit easier, and we wanted sites that would have low risk of disturbance subsequently. It took a long time for all those steps to be completed, and I know there was a lot of anxiety at times as to why work wasn't starting, but eventually it did. And this was one of the first foundations going in, being inspected by the local herd, and then gradually, brick upon brick, this was one of the self-builds, and they're 1.5 story again, so there's a ceiling, there's a hatch, and then it's a roof. I can stand up in the ground floor without having to stoop down, but certainly Carol and other people have to stoop, so we wanted the maximum roof space to be provided for the bats. This is the felt that we recommend. A lovely old Killaloo natural slate provided again by a salvage company, and a bee brick, which subsequently has been used by solitary bees. We ran a number of knowledge transfer meetings, and although we initially had hoped to build 10 of these, when construction started, the cost of materials went through the roof, and so we had to revise our budget. So 10 became 7, and that eventually became 6, because just time ran out for the 7th person to complete the project. So this is one of our knowledge transfer meetings held out on site. We have 5 of our farmers here for this, along with our QS and Carol and John Dillon from the operational group. And at my feet is the first delivery of the tilt tray that we provided in the building. And in this photograph, you can see a completed bat house. So the tilt tray is screwed into place at the opening, and if an avian or mammalian predator chooses to land on it, it tilts forward slowly and closes the opening. And then when they move off, the opening is there again for the bats. And you can see at the very top of the roof, there's a bat box, external bat box, and they are being used by Vesper bats. And then just around the corner of the building, you can see there's a small bee brick, and they are being used as well. This is what one looks like, a drone view, tucked into the corner of the field. We were very, very pleased that our project was chosen to be featured on the EU CAP network. And the image on the right-hand side was taken from a video that we had made by Bit Media. And this is one of our farmers, PJ, speaking to Ruth outside, talking about his experience. And this video, you can see it full length on our website. Now, Catherine will know that I've been reluctant to promote this project because although we are monitoring the houses, we still haven't recorded lesser horseshoe bats moving into the buildings. We had bat detectors along the hedgerows prior to the houses being built. And for the first time in that part of Limerick, we recorded lesser horseshoes at 3 of those areas. So we know they're in the area, but in very small numbers. We also know they're in the adjacent Glenstall Abbey, in the woodland there, because we did another project at the same time using passive detectors. So these are bat detectors that we can set out on the landscape. They run from dusk to dawn over a period of time. Any echolocation call emitted by a bat will be stored on a card, which we then remove, and we analyze it using software. This takes a long time to actually analyze and study. So I have all of the work from last summer analyzed, and lots of bat activity around the buildings, in the buildings, but unfortunately none detected of lesser horseshoe. And I've been doing the same survey, same monitoring work this summer, which is going up and down every 3 weeks to change the batteries, replace the cards. But I've only been able to quickly look through the first two sampling periods, and so far no lesser horseshoes. But I am convinced that they will move in, and that someday when I go down, I'll look up and I will see that they have moved in. I'm happy now to share the plans and any advice that I can give to other groups who are in a position to repeat this project, because I know that this will work where you have a healthy lesser horseshoe population. We tried it in an area where there are very few, but we really need to boost the small numbers there because it's critical to maintaining genetic flow and a link between the northerly and southerly populations. And then finally, coming to looking at the future opportunities. While this project was underway, I also worked with Dr. Ferdia Marnell of National Parks and Wildlife Service, and we wrote a species action plan for the lesser horseshoe bat. It's the only bat species that has a species action plan, for reasons hopefully will be obvious to you now, in that they have very special needs that need to be actively addressed by us. We're only just about 2 years into the plan, but we are making good progress. There are 29 actions. It was written in consultation with 15 stakeholders, all of whom asked to participate in the following steering group to make sure the plan works. And we have 2 meetings a year, and one of those is a field trip out to see where actions have been taken. And the members of the steering group, Department of Agriculture are there, Forest Service, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, OPW, Coillte, all of the local authorities in the 6 areas, Bat Conservation Ireland, ourselves. So we are, I believe, a really dedicated group committed to making this plan work, and you can access it from the National Parks and Wildlife Services website. Just some of the things we've achieved so far. Very early on, the first year, I worked with staff of NPWS to devise an audit system so that we went around and we assessed, we did a building survey to assess what summer sites that are being monitored every year are in need of conservation, are in need of help, need of repair, or in need to be enhanced. And that system now, that audit system, is now on a phone app, which will enable the staff to conduct this much easier. The hope is that when we have all this information, when National Parks and Wildlife Service have all this information to hand, we'll be able to create a scoring system where we'll say, well, we can do work of this nature at this site. We need major funding and have to source that. We want to keep the Natura 2000, those 41 SACs, in good condition for the species. Another thing that was raised very early on was that the local authorities, Coillte, the Forest Service and the OPW, didn't know where a lot of the roosts were that they may have been responsible for. And so that information was shared under a new, I think, data sharing agreement that had to be worked out between the parties. But that has been instrumental in informing these groups as to where roosts are when they're taking their decisions. And this summer then there's been a new phone app launched to record and upload the count data, where the numbers of the bats at these 200 sites can be recorded. Already, though, repairs have been funded by the Conservation Measures Unit at SACs owned by Coillte and by ourselves, and we have tested a new system for monitoring the bats using volunteers, which hopefully will allow us to undertake more summer emergence counts. And the Forest Service now has, the species is now a qualifying interest for entry into the forestry grant scheme. So it is an action plan. It's not sitting on a shelf somewhere. And then finally, Cork County Council identified possible pinch points at road junctions. So they knew where there were roosts, and then when they were planning putting up additional lighting, they realised this could be critical for the species, and they're now talking to Transport Infrastructure Ireland as to the best way of proceeding with that. And Limerick City and County Council used knowledge of roost data to avoid erecting new lighting at 2 locations. And I've been running this summer workshops for the local authorities, for the planners, for people involved with the environment section. The first one conducted in Limerick, and we've done one in Galway City and County Council, a joint one, and the most recent one was just this week in Mayo, where we have a wide range of local authority staff who know nothing about lesser horseshoe bats before the workshop, but they know afterwards. And we went out on a field trip on the Galway workshop up onto the Green Bridge. Some of you may be aware of when you're traveling again from Galway down to Limerick. And although I didn't ask them to form a horseshoe for the photograph, they very conveniently did. And we're really hoping that by getting information out to the people who are making very important decisions within their own work, that they'll give some consideration to the species. The final, though, big challenges is how do we address the increase in artificial lighting and the spread of urbanisation. Thankfully, on the West Coast, we still have some large dark areas, but Galway is beaming out lots of artificial light, obviously enough. We go down into Ennis, Shannon, Limerick, Tralee. The other area that we need to look at is establishing roost buffer zones. So around the SACs, there's this 2.5 kilometre diameter radius that we look at, and we try and protect what's in there. But we really need to move beyond that and engage with a lot more people, landowners, bringing them together to see, can we do more connectivity work? And that is the key to conserving the species, is establishing connectivity. And also in some areas such as Limerick, there just aren't suitable underground hibernation sites. But we know that that can be done, because once again, down in Glengarriff, National Parks and Wildlife Service created one. So on the photograph on the left shows the entrance porch and the door and the opening into it. And then on the other slide, you can see a diagram showing the construction of that. And what was used were 3 precast concrete culverts that are used in road systems. So they are tall enough to stand up in. So they are laid in the ground with a crane, large hole is dug, laid in the ground, one behind the other. There's a few other features there for the bats to enhance it, covered with earth, and it works. So it would be great if we could find some way of putting a number of these in place with landowners' permission. So that's where that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. I hope I'll be able to answer some of your questions. And as always, I'll send an email afterwards. And thank you for your attention. And I will stop sharing now.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. We ran a little bit over time there, but I just couldn't stop you there. It was such interesting presentation and lovely slides. And my goodness, the work that you're doing is just really fantastic. So congratulations to you and the team in the Vincent Wildlife Trust for all that excellent work that you're doing. It's really fantastic. We've lots of questions coming through, so we've only 10 minutes left for questions. So I think we'll go straight into them, Catherine.
Thanks, Mark.
Lots of interesting questions coming through there.
Thanks, Kate. And just to say, Teagasc are delighted to be on that steering group as well. And I suppose one of our contribution to that is this webinar, and to get your work out further, your fantastic work. And can I just reiterate to the people on the call that these presentation and the links, forward them on to other people, from this, because this will be on the website forever. So anything to do with Lesser Horseshoe Bats, I think we have a comprehensive, story of it now, Kate, which thank you very much. A few great interest in the distinct genetic populations, and a few people just querying there just to confirm that it is a good idea if they mix, and that's your idea of bringing corridors, isn't it?
Yes. The Lesser Horseshoe Bat in Ireland is obviously came over here a long time ago, and it is no longer got any connection with Lesser Horseshoes elsewhere in Europe. So because we're on an island, we're on the most northerly, westerly point of its European range, world range. We have, they're genetically not as diverse as they would be elsewhere. So we're starting off with, a group that wouldn't have the same genetic diversity. But they're drifting apart a little bit now. And obviously that's going to affect reproduction in time, resilience, immunity, which has been seen in other species. So we simply don't want that to proceed any further.
Brilliant. Yeah. And again, to confirm that they're in the west of Ireland. Now, just to put in context with other bats, because there's obviously people from all over the country, they're only in the west. And
yes.
But just to confirm that the other bats, I know there's differences, as you've alluded to, but the effect of light would be similar on all bats. Would that be a fair comment, Kate?
It depends on the group.
Okay.
The pipistrelle bats and liselers seem to be they're better able at flying in the open. They're not as restricted in their habitat use, and you will see bats flying around street lights and taking insects, because the insects are dazzled by the light, and the bats have discovered that that's a food source, easy food source, and they kind of balance the risk of predation themselves by having this ready food source. So the effect of artificial light is quite varied between the different species. But the woodland specialists, and the lesser horseshoe bat is a woodland specialist, so too are brown long-eared, natterers, whiskereds, and even Daubenton's bats that we see on water systems. They are much more affected and negatively impacted by artificial light.
Great.
So it varies between the different species.
And again, Kate, using your general bat experience, for all of our 9 bat species, do they all use hedges as travel corridors?
I would say yes. Again, it depends on the species, but I've seen Leisler's bats are very able to fly over open fields. I've seen them feeding over meadows, but they still, from research carried out by Dr. Caroline Shield, she did find that they would follow kind of river systems and linear features. So they are visual animals, although they echolocate and hunt by echolocation. They do use their eyesight to find their way at dusk and dawn through the landscape. So detecting linear features either by vision or by echolocation, it enables them to get from A to B. So linear features they are important for all of the bats at some stage in their life cycle, and obviously because that's where the food is going to be as well, the invertebrate fauna that they eat.
Brilliant. Now, coming back to your lesser horseshoe, I'll do one or two more, Mark. I'll come back to you. Come back to the lesser horseshoe. What factors are important in their are limiting the expansion further, let's say north, or could they be, or east even?
There have been a few sporadic records of individual lesser horseshoes. There's one in Sligo, there was one in Roscommon, and they do seem to be extending a little bit in East Cork. But there was a habitat suitability study carried out, and it really determined that it was the habitat where they are now. They have the smallest core range, they've just under 6,000 kilometres squared, and it does seem to correlate pretty much to the 6 counties where they are now. But maybe if there was additional woodland, climate change may have an influence in that as well, in that we have warmer winters. They may not need to hibernate for as long. They may not need access to the same critical hibernation sites. So we really don't know with climate change just what is going to happen, what will benefit. Maybe they will be able to move further north as the winters become milder. Certainly there's areas of Sligo that when I first surveyed there, I went, why aren't there lesser horseshoes here? You go over into somewhere like Fermanagh, this fantastic woodland underground sites, but I know from coming from that part of the country, you get frosts there a lot earlier and for a lot longer, which might be a limiting factor. But it could be possible because the population does seem to be increasing, but they're being hemmed into just the area that they are now.
I have to get to this one now that we're not too far from since Halloween. The bats are often so involved in myths, and people concerned by genuine concern maybe with disease transmission. Have you faced barriers in adhering to implement conservation measures? Myths and is there negatives and challenges?
Yes, there is, but I don't think bats are unique in that, and that there's a lot of myths with other species as well. But obviously the whole Bram Stoker Dracula thing, which is a minor detail, but yes, I think when COVID happened and there was so much kind of discussion about where that originated, and it was bats that caused it, and over various times bats are kind of blamed for that, but really I've never encountered any problem with working with bats. It's really a case when man impacts their landscape that we have these points of interaction. But if we don't encroach on their habitats, we will avoid some of those instances. They are actually a very important source of research for immune systems as is carried out in UCD with Emma Teeling, they're just a very valuable resource species for study. But I've been in lots of attics, lots of droppings, and I've never suffered anything from them.
I have seen, I was involved in a project a number of years ago, Kate, where they were doing a bat survey, but as part of that, they were doing looking at the moths and the various different insects that were the bats were feeding on. Are they a good indicator of habitat quality? Are they a good indicator of, if I have bats on my land, I must be doing something right? Would that be a fair
Yes.
assessment?
Yes. It is, yes. And in fact, bats are now used in studies. There is an ongoing study again at UCD looking at ecosystem services provided by bats. So within Ireland, obviously they eat vast sums of insects over the year. And as we have new insects coming to us because of climate change, bats are going to be a key predator of those. But they worldwide, so many ecosystems depend on the activities of bats because they're pollinators in other countries, in tropical countries. They are really important pollinators, seed dispersal agents. So they are extremely important group of animals, really, really important.
Mark, can I just ask one quick, back to the money? Have you an estimate of the cost of the structure you spoke about?
Yes, our bat houses, between 10,500 and 13,000. Yeah, but it depends on the cost of materials and how it's done. There would have been an economy we would have been able to save if we had one builder to do all of them. Obviously, there'd have been an economy of scale there. But we felt it important that a farmer could opt to do it themselves in their own way on their own land. And obviously, that's going to be a little bit more expensive, but you could, I think we could refine the model a little bit and easily get it done for 10, which is nothing compared to, the benefit it could bring.
Yeah, and just my final comment is the appreciation for your talk again, Kate, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks. And sorry, Catherine, I didn't mention that you're on the steering
thanks.
group, but I didn't have a list written down. You are a very, very, very valuable member of it.
Kate, finally, just I'm always interested, and I tend to ask speakers this question in terms of recommendations or policy recommendations. I mean, if you had a magic wand, or are there some measures you'd like to see incorporated into agri-environmental policy or schemes or ideas that you'd love to see happening?
Yeah, I'd like there to be multi-annual funding. And I would like there to be the potential to engage landowners to undertake the underground hibernation sites. So you could have one site maybe within a group of farmers that they would kind of have ownership of that and participate in the construction of that. And have lots more of those little buildings dotted around the landscape to enable the bats to move as they wish at different times of the year. Permanent structures. Ones that will be there for years to come, not temporary structures, and obviously more woodland, more hedgerow, and less artificial light at key spots on rivers and lakes.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, on that note, we're going to have to wrap things up. Thank you again so much, Kate, for joining us today. Catherine, thanks for helping with the questions. Next week, we're going to be having a special webinar with where you'll meet some of the category winners of the Teagasc FBD Environmental Sustainability Awards. So do join us next Friday morning for that special webinar where we'll meet the farmers who are doing the actions on the ground and implementing these environmental and sustainable actions on the ground. So until then, enjoy the weekend, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.